Did you guys hear that the US ran an anti-vax psyop at the height of COVID to discredit Chinese vaccines that resulted in the deaths of likely at least tens of thousands of people all around the world? As reported in the esteemed American Western pro-Western media outlet Reuters, the Pentagon ran a secret anti-vax campaign to undermine China during the pandemic. Interesting. The US military launched a clandestine program amid the COVID crisis to discredit China's Sinovac inoculation, payback for Beijing's efforts to blame Washington for the pandemic. One target, the Filipino public. Health experts say the gambit was indefensible and put innocent lives at risk. I mean, I went over this a lot in my Iraq video, but just to reiterate, anyone who thinks that the USA does anything out of morality and that they are not perfectly happy with literally killing people anywhere in the world to further their own geopolitical interests, or at least what they see as their own geopolitical interests, is just another of a million examples. Who gives a shit if Filipinos die because we make them scared of vaccines by running a fucking anti-vaccine psyop? As long as we get one over China, that's all that matters. And for the pettiest thing imaginable too, pay back for Beijing's efforts to blame Washington for the pandemic, which, by the way, came after Washington's own efforts to blame Beijing for the pandemic, which obviously came first. You know, the president at the time, Donald Trump, very famously called COVID the China virus. So, yeah, bit of tit for tat there. And then the US responded by doing like something far worse and probably killing tons of people. You know, they ran like a bunch of bot accounts on social media designed to like make like anti-China hashtags like China is the virus viral. A senior Defense Department official acknowledged the US military engaged in secret propaganda to disparage China's vaccine in the developing world, but the official declined to provide details. And this campaign it was started by Trump and then it was continued by Biden for like 5 months. And he continued after he was informed of it, which is also in this article. The military program started under former President Donald Trump and continued months into Joe Biden's presidency, Reuters found, even after alarmed social media executives warned the new administration that the Pentagon had been trafficking in COVID misinformation. And so the main target of this was the Philippines. In the Philippines, the Chinese vaccines were the first ones to arrive. And the US response to that was to do everything possible to discredit them. Now, if you remember, the Chinese vaccines were like less effective percentage-wise. They were like 65%. But that's still, you know, a 65% reduction in COVID symptoms is extremely fucking amazing and would save countless lives. And they were also, they were able to produce their vaccine a lot faster and in higher quantity than other countries were because it was less technologically complicated and easier to manufacture. So the US, in response to that, ran a campaign to discourage Filipinos from getting vaccinated, and it contributed to the fact that months after the vaccine was released, only 2.1 million out of 114 million Filipino citizens were fully vaccinated. Absolutely fucking crazy. Some Filipino healthcare professionals and former officials contacted by Reuters were shocked by the US anti-vax efforts, which they say exploited an already vulnerable citizenry. Public concerns about a dengue fever vaccine rolled out in the Philippines in 2016 had led to broad skepticism towards inoculations overall, said Lulu Bravo, executive director of the Philippine Foundation for Vaccination. The Pentagon campaign preyed on these fears. Why did you do it when people were dying? We were desperate. We don't have our own vaccine capacity. And the US propaganda effort contributed even more salt into the wound. Wow. Murderous Americans, as usual. I'm sure there are lots of people who died from COVID who did not need to die from COVID, she said. We weren't looking at this from a public health perspective, said a senior military officer involved in the program. We were looking at how we could drag China through the mud. Of course the US doesn't give a fuck about public health in the Philippines. They barely care about it in the US. I mean, duh. I wonder if they mentioned the Pakistan thing here. Yep. This is not the first time that the US has done something like this. When they were looking for Osama bin Laden, they ran a fake hepatitis vaccination campaign in Pakistan. And once it was found out about, people started thinking that like vaccines were an American plot to poison them. And this led to people rejecting polio vaccination, which then led to polio resurfacing in Pakistan after it had been eliminated decades ago. This is America. This is who they are. This is who they'll always be. It's who they've always been. And this article also compares the way that China assisted other countries during the pandemic versus the way that the USA did. China announced an ambitious COVID-assisted program, which included sending masks, ventilators, and its own vaccines, still being tested at the time, to struggling countries. You know how they add the still being tested at the time, just to make sure that, the vaccines probably shouldn't have been administered, according to them, even though the American and other Western vaccines were also in the same boat. Obviously. In May 2020, Xi announced that the vaccine China was developing would be made available as a global public good and would ensure vaccine accessibility and affordability in developing countries. Sinovac was the primary vaccine available in the Philippines for about a year until US-made vaccines became more widely available there in early 2022. Washington's plan, called Operation Warp Speed, was different. It favored inoculating Americans first, and it placed no restrictions on what pharmaceutical companies could charge developing countries for the remaining vaccines not used by the United States. The deal allowed the companies to play hardball with developing countries, forcing them to accept high prices, said Lawrence Gostin, a professor of medicine at Georgetown University who has worked with the World Health Organization. The deal sucked most of the supply out of the global market, Gostin said. The United States took a very determined America-first approach. To Washington's alarm, China's offers of assistance were tilting the geopolitical playing field across the developing world, including in the Philippines, where the government faced upwards of 100,000 infections in the early months of the pandemic. So, basically says it all there. China actually helped at least, helped in like quotation marks, but they had way less conditions on their COVID assistance to other countries than the US did, while the US companies were just left to do whatever the fuck they wanted to like gouge the ever-loving fuck out of third world countries who desperately needed vaccines and shit to prevent deaths. And this obviously helped China out geopolitically, made other countries come to their side, etc. And what was the US reaction to this? To take explicit action that clearly would result in the deaths of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in the third world by running anti-vax propaganda campaigns. What more is there to say about the American liberal internationalist state? This is what liberal internationalism means. It means that we are liberally going to do whatever the fuck we want internationally, and we don't give a shit how many people we kill as long as it benefits us. That's what liberal internationalism is, and that's what the USA is. Hooray!